So first and foremost, I just want to thank everyone who is in attendance right now. I appreciate it. I understand taking some time out of your day to listen to us speak is probably on the lower priorities, but I'm sure you guys get a lot of wisdom out of both Dan and JB here. So I appreciate everyone for joining us. My name is Greg White, and I'm with ProVal Technologies, and this webinar will be the Monitoring What Matters webinar. And this is both by ProVal and our good friends over at Domotz. And let me be the first to say I'm super excited about this one. We've been talking to JB for quite a while on putting something like this on. We actually met him at IT Nation Evolve. We're in the same solution partner peer group, and he has a lot of wisdom as far as monitoring what matters for MSPs go, and why should you listen to us. Between both ProVal and JB, we have both been monitoring, or at least helping to monitor, MSP systems for over a decade, thousands of MSPs worldwide. So I think these guys have some good knowledge to instill. And with that being said, I just wanted to introduce you guys. So ProVal and JB, if you don't mind, can you give the audience a quick hello, maybe a quick background, company you're with, favorite food, favorite superhero, and kick us off here.
I can do all that. Although I want to say, Greg, when you started talking about you gave my name and then you used the word wisdom, I got all excited and then I realized, oh, he must be talking about somebody else. So I am the Chief Product Officer at Domotz. I've been doing product management my whole career. I love it. I started out as an engineer, but I really got excited with Domotz because we're about an 8 or 9 year old company now. And we've been in the monitoring space that whole time. We have watched, the transition of things happening in the network space. And what I think what my colleagues, right, what Domotz is doing now in this space is we're really trying to transform how service providers, and really any service provider, whether they're on the integration side of things or whether they are on the IT side of things, we're really helping make their business more efficient. We're helping them run faster, right? Because as we know, things aren't getting any slower. But we're also trying to just help with general efficiency and make sure that their level 1 techs understand what's going on, and that the level 3 techs have tools to make sure that they solve problems faster and be more efficient with their customers. So that's me. I want to hear what Dan has to do.
Well, I'm Dan. I'm the operations manager at ProVal Tech. My favorite superhero is the network superhero JB Fowler. No. So I've been in the MSP space for about 10 years now. I've been doing IT for closer to 20. I own my own repair business, worked for Apple, started at ProVal as just a junior IT sysadmin, and then I did some consulting, some engineering, some developing, and now I am, running operations here. I am super excited about the webinar and to share some of my knowledge and my team's knowledge about monitoring and what matters most.
I appreciate it. Again, thank you guys both for joining. And I think we can just kick us off with a really general overarching question here. Oh, and my apologies. If anyone in chat has any questions at any point, please throw them into the Q&A section here. We'll leave some time at the end to answer any and all questions. So please feel free to throw over any questions at any point. Now, back to the question at hand here. We'll start general overarching question here. What should modern day MSPs be monitoring, and really why? So here, I know most of us know the basics since most of us are in an MSP, but feel free to get a little bit more granular. And on the why part, I'm personally curious to see, is there any money that MSPs are leaving on the table with some of this monitoring that they're doing? Can MSPs be charging more for certain monitoring or being in a different vertical? At the end of the day, I'm sure all MSPs are in this business to make money. So just something to keep in mind that maybe I'd want to have answered. But JB, if you want to kick us off here, love to hear your thoughts. And then Dan, jump in at any point.
Yeah, happy to do that. First of all, let me say, and I feel like I'm obligated to say this, but any modern MSP certainly needs to be monitoring the network infrastructure, right? It would be amiss if I didn't say that you need to be using a tool to do that. An important reason for that, though, actually goes beyond just the the sales and marketing hat that I want to put on, right? The reality is that MSPs today are dealing certainly with endpoints. And when I say endpoints, I'm talking about the PCs, the laptops that they're dealing with. I will also go as far to say that a lot of our MSPs are also installing networks, right? Meaning that they're putting in the routers, the wireless access points, the managed switches. Hopefully they're putting in firewalls for security purposes. What I think the modern MSP, though, it does versus, kind of the standard MSP is that they're looking at that network infrastructure that they've installed and they're making sure that it's operating the way it's supposed to be operating. They're making sure that it's, if they've assigned it to do certain things, that it's actually doing that. And more importantly, and I know that this is going to come up in some later discussions because it just always does with today's MSPs, but is around security. And how should you be looking at how these things, these systems, right, this network infrastructure is configured, and how can I make sure that it's not changing underneath me? How am I aware of what's going on there? So that to me is one of the critical parts that needs to go on there. I know, Dan, you and I talked a little bit about this before. I think you have some things within that infrastructure that people should be monitoring as well, right?
Absolutely. So a lot of MSPs think, okay, network monitoring is just making sure the router doesn't fall offline, making sure the bandwidth is where it needs to be. But network monitoring includes things like your domain joins. When a new endpoint shows up, being told that a new device is on the network is super important. And I know you might talk about that more later. Are your role-based servers doing what they need to be doing to maintain your network and your infrastructure as a whole? There's so much you can monitor there. Event IDs, server status, server performance, network performance. Heartbeats in certain cases as well where it's important. But
Yep.
it's more than just the Ethernet and the walls that we have to monitor. It's the servers, it's the devices. Everything works together, and you need to know immediately when something stops working.
Oh, absolutely. Right. And I see
Mhm.
to your point there, right? It's not, for any service provider today, right? They're thinking about security, they're thinking about security frameworks, right?
Mhm.
A critical part of those things are the network infrastructure. Not only what's on the network, right? Do I have good inventory and an understanding of the
Mhm.
assets that are on there? But more importantly, what are the things that I'm not monitoring with my traditional RMM tools that are on this network that could be affecting my security
Right.
footprint, right? My overall cyber hygiene. And in my mind, you have to have deeper scanning, right? You need to have a good tool that will scan that network completely, look at things like shadow IT, right? What are these systems
Mhm.
that are in place that are on this network that needs to be analyzed and known? And going back to the question that Greg originally asked, when it comes to network infrastructure, the modern MSP, they're starting to look at that stuff a lot more often. And that's what I think is important.
Right. And so you mentioned cyber hygiene, and it's, knowing what shows up on your network, knowing how secure your network is, things like that are great. But also, just the standard endpoint stuff. A lot of our MSPs nowadays are monitoring very small networks, mom and pop shops, things like that. And these are just endpoint clients. So AV installation, automated AV installation is number one, should be number one on everyone's security list. But monitoring that compliance is even more important, right? So we have to make sure AV agents are on. Well, how do we know when they're not? You have compliance software that tells you that puts it in front of your face. These 17 workstations are not compliant with what your policy is. And that is extremely important to monitor at all. Every MSP's compliance process and policy is going to be different based on the needs of their partners, based on verticals, based on whatever you are focusing on as a business, but you have to have it put in your face. You can't rely on, oh, I'll remember to look at it monthly. It needs to be in your face immediately.
Yeah, and you said one thing that I want to counter a little bit, okay? Or
Mhm.
it's more about bringing awareness to people. even in mom and pop shops, right? Family-owned businesses, or where you're dealing with just the small IT systems, I would point out that a lot of times these guys will also have network-based systems, whether it's in their business, in their retail shop, maybe it's a medical office. Okay, you've got doctors, whatever. There are actually a whole lot of systems that the modern MSP can be monitoring as well. Things like security cameras, right? Things like access control systems. In the retail space, you're going to start to see things like point of sale systems, digital signage in menus. These are all things that are critical to your client's business, okay?
Right.
And when I say critical, it's either helping them with insurance, okay, maintaining insurance, it's helping them with security, right? When it comes to even cyber hygiene, we're starting to see a lot more security frameworks put in place, physical security requirements, right? Making sure there are cameras on servers, making sure systems are locked appropriately, making sure that access control systems only have specific people getting in and out. Here's the thing with all of those different that different world, right? Those are all what we call IoT devices, right? This Internet of Things. But the reality is that those things are affecting your network. They're affecting your customers. And I look at this as a business opportunity for the modern MSP to say, hey, look, these things are touching these networks we've put in place. I can go further and monitor those for you with tools that I have in my stack. And it's a great way to expand on the business. So I want to say that because, Greg, to your question, how do modern MSPs need to be looking at profitability, more revenue and things? And in my mind, this is a way to do that. And network infrastructure tools are put in place to help you there.
No, that's super interesting. I feel like I haven't heard that because obviously security is a huge hot ticket item on every MSP's mind. I haven't heard this kind of blended perspective. Obviously monitoring your client's systems is always preached at, but this combining cyber and physical to just everyday monitoring, I think that's a huge point for what a modern day MSP should be looking like. I'm sure there's different, and I'm sure this goes into different verticals as far as what do we need to be monitoring when compared, the hospital to retail shop, like you said. And then I didn't even think about cameras. So that's an interesting perspective.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny when you start talking about hospitals or medical facilities, there's a whole, dare I say, plethora of devices that are out there that are now getting connected to the network that are pretty critical. Now, you have all sorts of other compliance and regulatory things that, we can talk about when it comes to these things. But if they're touching the network, okay, if they're touching the infrastructure that you're helping your customers with, then therein lies an opportunity. And if you have the right tools in place, you can utilize that to your advantage and help these guys with their business be that much more robust.
Right. And so I also want to add, and this is something I was just thinking of while we were discussing, it's monitoring the devices, but it's also monitoring backups, right? Especially when you can now back up firmwares for these IoT devices, for these security cam configurations. If there, God forbid, is a breach, you can have these firmwares backed up. And if these firmwares don't back up, you need to be alerted on it. You need to be monitoring that actively. So that goes both back into security as well as just disaster recovery. And if you don't have these things monitoring, something happens 2 months down the road, we haven't been backing these up and everybody thought they were, it's a bad time.
By the way, Dan, to the point about firmware, right? I think a lot of service providers understand this, but it's worthwhile stating it again. Often it is the IoT devices that create the holes inside of a customer's network, which allows for unauthorized access to come in. A lot of that happens because the device that was on the network didn't have the latest firmware, right? It wasn't being monitored. It wasn't being managed. And, a traditional RMM is not going to give you visibility into what a security camera is doing or what firmware version is out there on it. You need to have tools in place. Now, I'm also going to say, and again, service providers, especially network engineers, are thinking to themselves, well, that's why I have a segmented network. Yes, right? You should absolutely have a segmented network, but you as that service provider who built in that network and is monitoring and managing that network need to be able to maintain that. And if there are devices that are causing footprint holes, if you will, or less than clean cyber hygiene, you should be aware of it, and you should make those that own those systems accountable for it, right? So a modern
Yes.
a modern MSP is going to put in their tool stack the right platforms to help manage these things appropriately.
Right. And with the proliferation of open source solutions to things like edge devices, internet gateways, the IoT firmwares, with the advent of these open source that people are really picking up on, it's even more important to stay on top of firmware updates. There's a way to automate monitoring those, right? Whether you use a third-party tool, you can do some advanced monitoring in your RMM with the right expertise to look for these things as well. You can even, I mean, you could scrape an open source vendor's website for, hey, what's the latest version in this table? Okay, let me stick that in a custom field in my RMM. And if my devices aren't matching that, then I need an alert in my face. My technicians need to go fix it. So these are the type of things we're looking at for security wise, what we need to be doing.
Agreed. And back to the point about verticals and places that we can go. I think a lot of service providers are starting to look at retail verticals. They look at education, right? And they all have different needs and different requirements. I mean, Greg, this is kind of getting back to the question you asked. When I think of retail verticals, I've already called out point of sale systems, digital signage systems, but Dan, you and I spoke before about how those systems need to have split networks and how they need to manage these things. I would say the same thing for education, right? Whether you're in an elementary school, middle school, high school, certainly higher ed, right? Making sure that networks are segmented properly, used correctly, to take advantage of things like digital signage that may be out there, or point of sale systems that may be worked, security camera system, building management systems as well, right? All of these things touch networks. And at some point, you as a service provider need to be aware of them. So
right. And so like with the split networks in particular, a lot of payment vendors require it. A lot of payment vendors say, hey, like Aloha, for example, it requires a split network and that none of your infrastructure touches, but you're still responsible for the network in some cases. So you need to be monitoring that, and you need to think about, how do I monitor this network that I don't have any DNS on, I don't have any DHCP on, I still need to have open visibility on it. And then split networks also covers things like guest networks, especially in your hospitality industries. Your guest networks have to be rock solid. You have to be monitoring. You have to know not to get the noise of new device added to a network in a guest network, but you have to be monitoring activity. You have to be monitoring, okay, who's accessing my network? Did they pay to access this network in certain verticals? And what are they doing? What is suspicious? What kind of heuristics do you have set up to monitor that activity? So that's a very vertical specific thing for hospitality. And that kind of leads itself into other regulated verticals. A lot of MSPs are starting to hyper focus on regulated verticals. We're talking about HIPAA, we're talking about legal, we're talking about pro services, we're even talking about cannabis dispensaries, right? These things that have really, really strict regulations regarding who can access these networks, how do they access these networks, where can you access these networks from, security and resource management. So these things all have their own sets of monitors that are very, very important.
And I would say rules, right? Rules in place,
rules,
right? Anytime you're in a regulated industry, right? It means that the government or some larger entity is looking down on you, right? And they're putting in specific requirements for you to be there. Whether it's PCI compliance on point of sale systems, or you brought up cannabis, right? They have requirements where cameras have to cover like the whole facility, and they have to be able to tag everything from what they call seed to smoke, right? Wherever that seed started and the plant got manufactured, they have to have cameras on that thing, and it has to be tightly watched. Well, guess what, right? Those cameras are on networks. Those cameras, are fallible, right? They can lose firmware updates, or I should say not be on the right firmwares. They can go offline, right? And herein lies an opportunity for you as a service provider to make sure that you're helping that retail business or that manufacturer with the systems that are regulated, right? And I would tell you, there becomes an opportunity for you to make money, right? There's where your value is. So that, in my mind,
Definitely
is something that's important.
Now, I would also say that I guarantee there's not an MSP here in our participants list that hasn't seen an IP camera configured on the wrong subdomain, right? On the wrong subnet. And those are the things that you need to be alerted to before it becomes a problem, right? Or immediately when it becomes a problem.
Yep. Exactly. So with all of this, Greg, I think talking about these industries, really for the MSP, right? They need to be thinking about, how do I fit into these markets? How am I going to watch this? What are my costs? How do I make profits on these, right? Am I using tools here to just improve my cost of operations, right? Is it just a part of my tool stack, or do I have a way of generating revenue out of this? And in my mind, right, there's opportunities with both of these things, right? Save on your efficiencies, right? Bring in the right tools and make sure your team understands how to use them in the most efficient way. But then there's also these revenue generating opportunities, just depending on what it is you want to monitor with your customers.
I mean, with that additional responsibility comes additional profits. There's profitability assessments you can do to see how much it's going to cost you to come into compliance with these regulations. But it's important to serve these regulated verticals as well. They're not the low-hanging fruit, and the MSP that can fully regulate and or fully comply and monitor with these regulated verticals is going to succeed.
Yep. Completely agree. I would also point out, and a lot of times service providers don't want to hear this, but given all of the latest, cyber threats, ransomwares, cybersecurity issues, there's no doubt in my mind that regulation is coming just to the MSPs themselves, and they need to start being more and more aware of this. I think that the beauty of some of these security frameworks is that there's a lot of flexibility in them. The CIS controls are absolutely a basis for these things, but I think service providers need to get up to speed on what those CIS controls mean, not only for your customer, but also for you as a service provider. You're going to need to know what's on your networks as well as customer networks. You're going to need to have proactive topology maps. You're going to need to have an understanding or an inventory of not only all the hardware that's on these networks, but also all the software, right? Whether it's software running on your network or it's software being used by your clients in the cloud, right? These are just things that are coming, and you have to be ready for it.
Absolutely. Now, I want to take a moment to say that this is a lot of information that we're putting out there. It's a lot of fast, quick fire information. So please use the Q&A panel. If you need anything at all, any clarification at all, we will come back to it. So anything that you need, use the Q&A panel. We are there for you as well. We're going to hit them all up at the end.
Greg's going to stress me out with questions, but I'll do my best to answer them.
I'm looking forward to them. I like questions.
You guys are doing great, and it's funny. So we're talking about the future here, and that's what this webinar is about. It's for the modern day MSP, so we can stay ahead of the curve and give these guys what's kind of next. And when speaking of the future, I got to ask the most popular question on really every MSP's mind, or any field of technology rather, and that's AI. Is AI poking its little head into our monitoring space yet? And I'm just curious to see what you guys both have seen, boots on the ground, whether it's AI integrated with your monitoring or AI just intervention as a whole? Have you guys seen anything or heard anything from your end that would?
Is that what the I is? Is I mean intervention, or is it
I
intelligence?
believe so.
I'm not sure. Yeah. So so AI is definitely rearing its head up everywhere. Okay. From a monitoring perspective, I'm going to say absolutely. Here's the trick. I think a lot of probably the more advanced service providers, even people that are in the database space, dealing with SQL, dealing with all of these more advanced structures, know that data is extremely powerful. In our world, when it comes to monitoring networks, in fact, we have data scientists at Domotz that are looking at this notion of observability. And when we talk about observability, it means how can we look at the state of all of the systems that are on a network, or how can we look at the state of a particular device and all of the, let's call them sensors that are within that device, right? How can we take that state? How can we associate that with logs that are coming from particular devices, coming from other devices that may be independent of those systems? And then how can we look at traces, right? How can we look at how, the action on one device caused another device to behave in a certain way? You can,
Butterfly
of course,
effect.
Absolutely, right? How can you look at all of these things and tie them together? From my perspective, there's no way that you can do that with the technology we have today in an effective way. The only way it's going to work is by taking advantage of AI, advanced learning, and be able to decipher, right, what matters. How can we take the noise that we're seeing in the system, boil it down to some few actions that we as humans can then take, action on, right, or respond to.
Absolutely.
Is AI there yet? I'm going to say no.
Not yet, but it's going.
But it's getting there, and it's getting there much faster than what we've seen from the last 10 years, right?
Absolutely. I also want to say now, while parsing data is a great thing for AI to tackle right now, I'm really excited about the future in regards to monitoring itself. Now, of course, I speak from an endpoints perspective, from a server perspective, but ProVal's starting to dip their toes into predictive monitoring and proactive monitoring, which is really what the future of monitoring is. MSPs are very reactive right now. Oh, a hard drive failed. A hard drive's full. We got to go fix it. We have a piece of software that a piece of automation for our partners that looks at a hard drive utilization over a period of time, looks at the growth and says, your hard drive's going to be full in 7 days. Your hard drive is going to be full based on the utilization so far over however many months you've been using this drive. It's going to be full in 12 days. That's the kind of thing that AI is really going to be able to launch wholeheartedly, is predictive monitoring. If you take in a data set, it can take in all of the data over the past 20 years of an MSP's client and say, we know that drive's about to fail because it was installed in a machine 4 years ago. This partner uses these drives in this manner. They typically have an average fail rate of XYZ. So go replace these drives now. And then you can tie in automation with that. Like we would make automation content for a partner for this that said, okay, we got that alert from the AI monitoring. Let's just go ahead and automatically run SFC. Let's automatically run check disk. Let's do a crystal disk report. Content that runs crystal disk reports for our partners. So AI is going to be great for proactive monitoring, and it's going to help automation so much more. That's where I see the future of AI.
I agree.
No, that's super interesting.
The predictive maintenance side of it, right? I mean, when we talk about observability, in my mind, that's really what it's about. It's about looking at trends, right? And then being able to, I'm going to say, help you as an MSP more efficient, right? Because if you know that a system is going to be in a troubled state based off of all of the other occurrences that have happened, then you can be more proactive with your customers. And by the way, if you're being proactive, it means that you're not fighting fires. You're not dealing with failed issues or emergencies.
Exactly.
And you can just be more efficient. It helps your team, right, be that much better when it comes to managing your customers and your clients. So yes, I mean, to answer your question, Greg, AI, it's going to be important. It's going to help us in all aspects of the service provider, everything from engineering, which I feel like what Dan fundamentally is talking about here and how it solves that. But it's also going to help us in the support, right? The communications with our customers. It's going to help us with sales and marketing, right? And it's going to be awesome.
Yeah, to your point, we're seeing it drop into every single tool nowadays that drops. It's like the main with AI built in that does this. Yeah. So I'm sure it's right around the corner. But speaking of tools, I'd love to, this is a hot item. What tools does the modern day MSP need? I feel like there's a new tool in front of their face each and every day. Where it's like, hey, this does this. So I get it. We can get into like a lot of tools, but what tools are absolutely needed? Maybe not needed, but what tools are needed for the modern day MSP? And either one of you can tackle this one.
No, it's a good question. So let me take that, and then Dan, I'll let you jump in. I was talking to a service provider here in the Salt Lake area just the other day. He told me that he had 51 different tools that he uses, which, I mean, he's a good size service provider, but he's got 51 tools. I mean, imagine trying to keep your staff, up to date with all.
My anxiety is already through the roof thinking about this guy.
Yeah, exactly. There's no doubt in my mind that, an MSP, whether you're small or large, right, you're going to need a couple of key things, right? You're certainly going to have an RMM for managing the endpoints. You're certainly going to have, at least I hope you have, some form of a PSA tool, right, for ticketing systems. I'm going to make the argument, of course, because I'm at Domotz, right? But I'm going to make the argument that you really will need a network infrastructure management tool. I'm definitely willing to bet that it's not at the top of a lot of service providers' radar screen, but with all of the security frameworks, with all of the regulations like we talked about earlier, with the fact that you want to be proactive, you're going to need a more modern tool that helps you with the advanced networks that are out there today. And I think we're going to talk about this, but traditional RMM is not going to help you in the way that some of these more advanced network monitoring tools can.
Right. And just to jump in real quick.
Go, Dan. I'll let you go.
Sorry, just to jump in real quick. It's even more important for these network monitoring tools and other tools like this because a lot of MSPs are considering going RMM-less nowadays.
Oh yeah,
that's where the industry seems to be going. So what JB's saying is completely on point. And now I'll stop interrupting you. Go ahead.
I'm glad you interrupted because you're right. I mean, the RMM is changing, right? So I'm really glad you said that. It really is changing, and heck, I mean, look at what our friends at Microsoft are doing with Intune and the other large players that are out there, right? So I completely get it. One thing that I think I want to get across before Dan gets into some of the other tools is that the modern MSP is going to keep it as simple as possible. I will say this, and my friend with 51 tools is a good guy. He is a friend, but it's too much to manage. And I think it makes it very difficult for the service provider to really scale the business if he's worried about 51 things going wrong. I think you do need to keep your software stack as simple as possible. I think you need to focus on being able to patch endpoints. I think you need to be able to monitor systems. So you need something for that. You need something that will help you with configuring devices, whether it's the endpoint or the infrastructure itself. To the point that Dan's been making, automating systems, right? And automating so that you're more efficient is really important. But also, and this, people may not realize this, but I think being able to report back to your clients is a really critical part as well. And there are tools out there that you need to use for that. So again, patching, monitoring, configuring systems, right? Automating and reporting, in my mind, are some of the critical things that I think modern MSP has to focus on.
Yeah, those are the pillars, right?
Mhm.
For patching, we were looking at security as a whole, monitoring and alerting, configuration and desired state configuration of an endpoint through automation, and getting those QBRs out so that the partners can understand what their environments look like. Getting daily reports on backups. So definitely, these are the pillars of an MSP. I'm going to dig a little bit into the tools themselves to monitor. Like we were talking about earlier, most MSPs have an RMM, right? We support several RMMs here at ProVal. We're experts in them. We know how to configure them. We know how to monitor. We know how to alert. It's very RMMs are a jack of all trades, right? You can monitor a lot and you can monitor things decently well. But I think the modern MSP is starting to consider, what if I have a stack of 5 or 6 applications that each cover an individual pillar, like we talked about earlier, right? So, just as an example, desired state configuration. That's big right now. There's a couple of vendors out there that are really taking over the space of making sure that your endpoints are automatically set up and configured based on a policy. Right now, some MSPs order a computer off of computerstore.com, and then it gets shipped in, and then they put in the Windows 11 USB, and then they go through OOBE, and then they install their RMM agent. And then instead of letting the RMM agent handle it, then they install Google Chrome and Open Office or Microsoft Office, and they're doing all of this manually. A desired state configuration tool says put this USB stick in the computer. Be like the first time you power it on, wait half an hour, everything's done. It goes through OOBE for you. It goes through software configuration for you. It sets power settings. It sets wallpapers. It sets group policy in some cases. Like all of this can be automated. And then on top of that, once it's configured, you go into monitoring it. And that's called compliance monitoring, where Linda in accounting installs the 3rd version of QuickBooks 2017, because she needs it, but it's not within compliance. Your IT team says, Linda, do you need that? Should we add it to the compliance, or should we automatically uninstall it for you? That goes back to security, but it's putting those things in your face and then launching automation to handle them. So, for endpoints, you're monitoring things like event IDs as well, application utilization, security patches. RMMs are decent for that. RMMs also do some reporting, and sometimes one of the biggest complaints we hear from our clients when we're onboarding them through, we do this huge onboarding process, just setting up best practices, is they go, reporting's not where I want it to be in my RMM. That can be fixed. That takes a lot of effort, but the RMM can report somewhat good. I don't know the word. They can report well, but there's also standalone reporting tools. So now we have desired state configuration standalone. We have reporting standalone. Every security solution has its own dashboard, right, with its own agent. So that's standalone. So either choose RMM and supplement, or consider going stack-based solutions.
Yeah, it makes sense.
These are all great insights here. I appreciate that, Dan and JB. And I know we're coming up, going fast here, but coming up to time. So we have tools that we should be implementing in our MSP, and then what should we be doing from what should we be monitoring perspective. But just, I'd like to pick your guys' brains. You guys both have been in this industry for quite some time now. Talking about overall best practices, what can an MSP leave from this call today and go implement in their own MSP tomorrow? So if you want to get into just maybe your top best practices, tips, tricks for MSPs today, I think that'd be a great next segue for everyone listening.
Yeah.
JB, you want to take it from there?
Can. I mean, so first of all, I'm going to go back to what I said. You got to keep it simple, right? The whole KISS process, right? In our case, in the MSP world, it's keep IT, right? Simple, stupid. So that's important. So simplicity is something that we have to drive towards, and I think we can talk quite a bit about that. I think another thing that's important, right, as a tip for MSPs today, right? MSPs are in a world of service. They are making sure that their customers, first of all, that the business is operating the way it should. But I want service providers to be looked at as strategic partners with their customers. Whether it's the small mom and pop shop that just simply needs the IT department, or whether it's a corporation that you're dealing with and you're acting as a co-managed service, right, with some let's call them employed IT department folks. One of the key things with large and small is communications. And, Dan talked about it here at the end when it came to reporting, but in my mind, making sure you stay in touch with your customers is a critical part in communicating with customers. So I think that's one tip that is necessary. Of course, rolling that back into the tools, you need to make sure that the tools help you with that communication. The third thing, right? The third thing that I want to point out is around security. Okay. Probably obvious, right? Probably doesn't necessarily need to be stated. But if you as a service provider are not on top of security with your customers, if you're not looking at security frameworks right now, if you're not thinking about like how you are managing the CIS controls, and if you're not making sure that your tools, whether you've got 1 or 51 tools, right, if they're not compliant with a lot of the security best practices, you're going to be in a world of hurt in the next few years. So that's a strong thing. And then lastly, the thing that I want to say and that we should talk about probably is performance, right? And when I say performance, I mean everything from network performance and how your networks, how your customer networks are behaving, but also I want to say how you as an entity, right? How your employees are performing, right? Do they have the right tools to be successful? Are you guys thinking about how AI is going to help efficiency? Are you going to think about, how the right tool is going to minimize the efforts and use things like Dan's been talking about when it comes to automation, right? Those are some of the major buckets that I think we can talk about here, Greg. Dan, do you have some thoughts?
I do. I want to first call back to the simplicity portion, because I think that in order to have a scalable MSP, simplicity is one of the most important things. And the main two things that help with your simplicity are noise and automation, noise management, rather. You don't want the noise, you want to get rid of it. And the first thing I always tell our partners when we're onboarding them is the only thing that you should be seeing. Now, we've talked a lot about monitoring and what we should be monitoring, but the only thing that should be coming in front of a person is either a report of the things that were fixed automatically or actionable tickets, right? So you don't need to know every time, Hard Drives Incorporated has 5 gigabytes left on their drive. You can automate that. Your technician doesn't need to go, yep, they have 5 gigs left. Cool, closing ticket, right? That's a waste of time. And hundreds of those add up, right? That's 2 minutes each. You've just wasted several hours just closing noise tickets. That's why when we do onboarding, it's like the first thing we hit is, how much noise do you have? We ask it in the sales process. How much noise do you have? What do you need to cut down on? How many tickets are you getting a day from your RMM? You have to cut it down.
That's a huge one. And what would you say are the top 3 noisiest items? Because we hear it all the time on our side. and people it's always the same stuff. What would you say, just top 3, top of your head?
You mean other than discs?
Other than, yeah, discs.
So a lot of people have heartbeat monitors configured incorrectly.
Yeah,
they have a heartbeat monitor on every device on their network, on Judy in account payables laptop. Oh, that's turned off for the night. Here's a ticket, right? It's definitely drives, and I think that goes into 2 subsets: drive space, failing drives. Those are huge, and it's so important to tune, especially drive space monitoring. Like, we have a best practice where we tune based on the size of a drive through automation, whether or not we are looking for a static amount or a percentile amount. Like large drives, we look at, are you 20 gigs or below? We run our bespoke cleanup script for you. Are you 5 gigs and below? You need to address it. For smaller drives, we look at a percentile base. Are you below 10% of your usable space? Let's clean it up. But again, all of that prevents these actionable tickets being buried under an avalanche of noise. So disk space, disk issues, and faulty or inconfigured network monitoring.
For us, as a network monitoring tool, Greg, I feel like some of the noisiest things that happen, and this is really important for, I think, service providers to understand how the tools work and make sure they configure these things correctly. But they'll put alerts, right, that will generate tickets on, like Dan said, actually heartbeats, when they really should be looking at, has the system been offline for X amount of time? They will also, what I would say is that they get noise from misconfiguration of alerts because they put an alert on a switch and they didn't properly align with all of the endpoints that were on that switch. So they may get like an overabundance of alerts when they should have been looking at just the parent alert, if I can call it that, right, from the parent-child relationship within the network. Those are some of the things that we see. Incorrectly configuring sensors. So when I'm looking at SNMP variables, right, within particular devices, looking at the wrong variable, as silly as that sounds, right? Sometimes there are better variables to choose when it comes to whether it's looking at temperature or looking at utilization. So those are some of the things that we see. The point being, knowing how to configure the tools appropriately is a really critical part. So,
yes,
working with the, I'm going to say the tool provider, working with us, right, going with our onboarding guys to make sure things are configured right is how we can help. And I think you guys do the same thing.
We do. That is one of our primary services, is consulting with our partners and making sure, looking at their environments proactively, saying, look, man, you're getting dozens of these alerts. You don't need them. Let's help you configure it and let's help you automate it. That's one of our biggest services here. I mean, I know we do backup, we do knock, things like that, but really digging into these RMM environments is our bread and butter. It's how we make sure that you're following best practice monitoring.
Yeah. So once you get this stuff set up, right, and the alerts, it gets back to, I think, also the reporting side of it, right? How are you going to report, what you've been doing for your clients? And in my mind, you need to have a tool that helps you with that. You need to make sure that your customers, look, the QBR, or the Technology Business Review, does a couple of good things for you. First of all, it keeps you in touch with your clients. Okay, so a service provider that's not talking to their clients is just asking for, to lose that customer. So you need to be talking to your customers on a regular basis. You need to be telling them things like, here's what tickets your teams have opened with us. Here's how fast of resolution that we did with these guys. But you also need to be looking at this reporting, right? This communications process as a way for you to help your clients understand what are the modern technologies that are out there. What are the changes that are happening to PCs? By the way, right, what are the systems that this customer has in place that's now 5 years old and, to Dan's point, is about to fail, right? How can we help have healthy conversations so that you can not only report on all the actions, right, what you're doing for that customer when they're paying you, but also how can you provide them as a strategic partner with what are all the new opportunities? How is AI going to affect them, right? These are some of the things that I think we need to be looking at. So
absolutely. And just real quick to list off a few other things, like you need to be setting up, just as far as 10 best tricks that all MSPs should be doing, you need to be setting partner expectations very well. Instead of asking every partner, how do you want to do it? have best practices ready for your partner. We patch on this day, we do it this frequently, right? That's
Yep.
very important. And that goes into onboarding. And in our follow-up email, we're going to send a link to a CompTIA publication that has really good best practices for setting partner expectations during onboarding and offboarding, I believe.
Yeah,
Another thing. Mhm.
a lot of that, Dan, is around like kind of that sales process and that QBR
Right.
process, right? What should you
Right.
be talking about with your customer? So I really like that paper.
Yeah.
And it's generalized, so it's really good.
It is really good. A couple of other things I want to mention real quick is, client side expectations are important, but if you don't have a specialized triage expert in your organization, get one. It will pay for itself 10 times over. Um, just make sure that these experts know what criticality, what alert is, who is the best in your organization at certain issues. It's more than just rote process. This ticket says these words, it goes to this queue. It's having a person intimately familiar with your operations saying this ticket goes to John because he is stellar at going to fix a router, right? Going to fix a gateway. This guy's really good at patch panels. Let me send him that sort of thing, right? So I just wanted to list a couple things real quick.
I want to point out,
yeah,
because we're getting close on our time here, Dan. I want to point
we
out,
are.
I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna beat this horse. It's probably already dead, but it's gonna come alive. Security frameworks, right?
Mhm.
I think that a lot of MSPs are really scared about security frameworks. But I want you to know something. The best thing you can do is go out, pick a framework that probably goes around like your customers,
Mhm.
but then get an assessment, right? Understand where you are
Mhm.
and recognize the fact that security is really about a process, right? It's about continuous improvements. And you need to know what's on your network, right? That's why it's CIS control number one, right? You need to use a tool that helps you understand what's in the network and go from there. That's how you get started. The other thing I want to say about security is that not knowing what's on your network, right? This notion of shadow IT, right?
Mhm.
There's no place for that anymore. So
No.
a modern MSP has to be aware of that.
Right. Now, I was going to talk a lot about SOC compliance, and we just went through that process, so we have some really good insight. But all I'm going to say, based on what you just said, is if you want to know how secure you are, hire a thief. Right? Get some pen testing done. Get some network analysis. Get some endpoint analysis. We had a pen test done before our SOC journey, and it was enlightening. We didn't have anything critical, but just the insight we got from that on what we could improve,
Yeah.
100% effective.
We
And
have
that's all I'm going to say on that.
Yeah, we actually have a 26-page document on our website
Woo!
that is about how Domotz handles security, right? How we've built security into our systems. We also talk about the process of going through SOC 2 compliance, right?
Mm-hmm.
SOC 2 type 2 compliant. And it's arduous, right? It's a long thing, but it's necessary. So
It is.
the last
And I'm more
comment.
than happy to send those out for everyone that's
Yeah.
viewing. I'll send an email after this
Yeah, I'll send you.
webinar. But boys, I think we are almost at time here.
We are.
Let's do like last 2 points, actionable points for an MSP. What do you guys think that an MSP needs to keep in mind or be doing that we can leave off here?
I'll start on that one. Just to summarize what the most important points are: get rid of your noise, monitor what is actionable, and triage properly.
That was pretty damn simple. I like that.
Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
and that actually feeds into
Yep.
what I said earlier, right? Which is keep things simple, right?
Mhm.
And I think that that's so important. For me, I think the one thing that people need to start looking at is what's on their network and why is it on the network.
Mhm.
If it's not supposed to be there, get it off, right? There's no place,
Right.
as I said, for shadow IT. And with this, with the world of IoT kind of invading our networks more and more, it's just that much more important. And
Right.
thieves, hackers are looking for all different ways in which they can do that. The other thing that Dan talked about so much, which I think is important, is this notion of automation, right? How can you as an MSP make yourselves, make your teams more efficient? And it starts with automation. It starts with using the right tool. So that to me is an important part there, Greg.
Yep.
Boys, I really appreciate this, and I want to say thank you so much for everyone who's joined us today. I know we're going over a little on time. I don't know if we'll have time for questions, and I see a couple of questions in the chat. I'm more than happy to send out an email after this call just to answer any and all questions, even if you haven't thrown one in yet. And this recording will be up on all of our channels soon. I believe next week, Monday at the latest. So please check that out. And if you need to talk to ProVal or Domotz on anything that was mentioned today, these boys are more than happy to meet with you guys. We will be in IT Nation Evolve and Connect for in November. So please, if you're there, shoot us a quick DM. We'd love to meet up. JB, do you have anything else that you'd like to leave the audience with, or Dan?
I do.
Yeah. You go first, JB.
You want me to go first? I'll go first.
Yeah, so, you go first.
Absolutely. I mean, if you guys want to get a hold of our sales team, if you need help with onboarding, you need a better understanding of Domotz and how a tool like a network infrastructure monitoring tool can help you, let us know, right? We're going to help you guys understand what you need, and it's not necessarily about us, right? We want to help you guys.
And so I'm going to say as well, like ProVal, we focus on the automation. We focus on keeping it simple for you. We focus on letting you just handle, work with your partners and not with your RMM. So if you want to talk to me about it, I will talk your head off about automation and everything that we can do. Just reach out to us. I think it's sales@provaltech.com just to get the conversation started. Greg will reach out to me and say, hey, Joe wanted to talk to you about XYZ. So yeah, no, that's just reach out to me. I love to talk. I love to meet new people. If you see me in November, do not feel shy about coming up and saying hey, because I love meeting people.
I thought you were going to say don't approach me. I might bite. That's what you were saying.
Do not feel like you can talk to me.
Still got bite mark on me.
Very good.
Last time
we saw your question here. I'll send you that recording after this call. Sure.
Absolutely.
So again, thank you guys so much for joining. I think that's about it. And if you have any questions, please shoot me an email. I'll again send that email right after this call for everyone that joined with us, and we'll go from there. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.